welcome to Press Play for Education. We are so excited you have joined us today for the very first episode of our new podcast. I'm Juliana, and I'm joined today by my wonderful co-host,
Elisa.
And we are two teachers talking about all things education. So we are here to break down barriers. We're advocating for empathy within communities. And outside of the classroom, we're actually trying to get more involved in those communities as well. So for myself, I'm from where the wild teachers are, and I'm on a mission to empower kinder teachers and early childhood educators and to support them with specialised resources.
I'm from Three Doves. We are a team of educators and carers supporting our community outside formal education and care environments.
And our hope for Press Play for Education is to provide all of you listeners, be it parents, families, fellow educators, teachers, just anybody listening, with information about the Victorian education system, but from a teacher's perspective, which is something that we feel is lacking in the current environment with the information that's out there. But before we jump into that, I think we'd better acknowledge whose country we're on here, Elisa.
Sounds good. Firstly, we would like to acknowledge that we are coming to you today from the lands of the Wurundjeri, Wathaurong and Wurundjeri people. We acknowledge their continuing connection to the land and pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. We recognise them as the sovereign owners of the land and that this sovereignty was never ceded.
Thank you so much for that. So this is something that you'll hear a lot in our podcast. It's an important thing, part of what is going on at the moment in Australia, part of the cultural reckoning that's happening. So you'll hear this a lot in our podcast, and we think it's really important that we continue to do this. And I think something equally important, I'm sure you'll agree with me, Elisa, is making sure our listeners know who we are.
Definitely.
Yeah. So I'll jump in and go first. So I'm Juliana. I've been an early childhood educator for 8 years, and I've been working in kindergartens for 5 of those years, and I am a bit of an aspiring kinder teacher. I'm at university at the moment. I'm studying history and creative writing, and I'm working part-time in a sessional kindergarten. So as I said, I've been in kinder for a while, and I've been in early childhood for a while, and I've been on that side working with parents, working with families, working with professionals and other people who are assisting children to be the best they can be. So I'm coming to you from the early childhood perspective of what education is. Now, when I'm not in a kinder classroom, you'll find me doing 2 things. You'll either find me learning German, which I'm determined to master, and you'll probably also find me even more frequently with my 4 guinea pigs, Billy, Zeta, Eclair and Lilla. Now, Billy and Zeta are my babies. I adopted them last year. But Lilla and Eclair are actually my foster babies from the RSPCA, and they're going to be looking for their forever homes shortly. Do you reckon you're up for that, Alyssa? Think you're going to adopt some guinea pigs?
Oh, not now, Julia, not now, but maybe one day. But I've got a little bit to share about myself now. So I'm a primary school teacher at an autistic school. I've taught inside and outside schools as well as community homes. I was the founder of Three Doves. That reaches out to communities and outside schooling environment. And yeah, basically a fun fact about me is I am still learning how to ride a bike. Can you believe that, Juliana?
No way. I did not know that. That is crazy.
Oh, you know what? Maybe I can ride a bike with training wheels at the moment, but without, I just can't get that balancing.
Oh, I think my kinders might leave you in the dust, Alyssa. But also we do need to let you know, as we said, we're teachers, we're educators, we're passionate about what we do, but we're not paediatricians, we're not psychologists, we're not coming to you as the one and only experts in childhood development. As we said, we're educators. We want to reach out to the community. And if you hear anything here that we've sourced, be it from the Victorian government or any of the regulatory bodies, you'll be able to access that source. We'll have all of that there for you. And if you notice that we missed something, feel free to let us know. We are always aware that sometimes we make mistakes. So never feel that you can't reach out and say, hey, Juliana, Alyssa, you completely missed giving me that source. It's really important. I need to know what it is.
Definitely.
So today we are talking about school readiness. What is it? Well, I'm I'm going to jump straight in and tell you, according to the Australian government, school readiness is a measure of the knowledge, skills and behaviours that enable children to participate and succeed in school. And that looks like so many different things from early childhood to primary school. What do you think of that definition, Elisa?
Yeah, it is very broad, isn't it? Well, I can probably use those certain words there across all the teaching in early childhood to primary, mainstream, and also a bit of special needs and autistic school. That's a good definition to start off with.
I think so. And I think you make the point that it is really broad. It needs to be narrowed down when we're particularly talking to families and their individual children. Because I reckon if I walked up to a parent or a guardian and I said, school readiness is a measure of the knowledge and skills, blah, 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 they'd go, Juliana, what are you on about? So absolutely, we're not going to be quoting that. So what does that mean maybe in an early childhood setting? So I suppose for me, and I don't know about for you, Alyssa, but for me, when I'm looking for school readiness, there's 3 things that I have to look for. One of them is age, because you'll know as a primary teacher, there's an age restriction. Children in Victoria can't start school under 4. And they also need to have started by 6. So once the child's past that age barrier, then I'm looking for their communication skills. And that doesn't necessarily mean, can they talk? Although by kinder, we would be expecting that unless there is a special need or some sort of developmental delay. It's more about if they can clearly express their needs, whether that's in English, in a home language, in another language like Auslan, or some children will use visual cards. I'm sure you've seen it all in primary school as well. So it's all about making sure they can clearly express what they need in a way that other people around them, adults, peers, can understand. And the next thing that I'm really looking for in school readiness is the child's ability to regulate. And when in early childhood, when we talk about regulation, I'd be interested to hear if you talk about it the same way in primary school. We're talking about reasonably being able to wait to have certain needs met. So for instance, if I've got a hungry child, can they wait till snack time or do they need to eat right now? And of course, reason's the key here. If you've got a child that needs something, and no teacher's going to say, no, you can't have it. But I'm always looking for whether that child can reasonably wait for their needs, because I think that's perhaps, in my opinion at least, the key part of school readiness, because primary school can be quite a structured environment compared to kindergarten.
Now, that's very interesting to understand how early childhood starts off. And so I suppose, we as primary school educators, we actually try to continue on from early childhood setting, considering that it's very play-based, very nursery rhymes. They're still learning their fine motor and gross motor skills. Isn't that right, Juliana?
Absolutely.
So we consider all that. But once they reach primary school, which is usually they must attend school at the age of 6, and they enroll in a government school. If they do, they must turn 5 before the 30th of April of that year they start school. And this may change, and it's very rare. There are exceptions for the age policy, but you can find more of these details in the Victorian Government website, which is under the Starting Primary School Guide. So once all that happens, we actually take consideration and notes from the early childhood setting. And it's, as I mentioned, it's very play-based in early childhood. And so the difference between early childhood and primary is we actually have more elaborated learning areas. And they're divided into strands. So we've got the arts, we've got English, we've got health and physical education, languages, even different capabilities. And so, so their skills evolve even more when they're in primary school. And we actually use the Victorian curriculum Now, what curriculum do you guys use, Juliana?
Yeah, I should have mentioned that, shouldn't I? So early childhood is actually governed by a lot of regulations, but the one you'll hear about most is what we call the ELF, the EYLF, or the Early Years Learning Framework. And it's actually a little bit similar to the Victorian curriculum in that it's broken up into different strands, although we call these outcomes. But our outcomes are identity, community, well-being, learning, and communication. And then within those 5 areas, they're broken down even further, and then they're broken down even further. So you can be looking at outcome 3.1.2.4 sometimes.
Wow, it's numbers.
It starts to get confusing, but basically what all those outcomes mean is it just means, does the child have a sense of themselves, their own identity? How do they relate to their community, be that the wider community, be that their peers, their own culture, other cultures around them? Are they safe and healthy? Are they learning? And not even are they learning, because all children learn. They don't all learn the same way, but I think all children are always learning.
Right.
And how they learn, what is the best way that they learn? As you've said, Alyssa, early childhood is really play-based, but we are trying to sort of branch out, and those children who sometimes would like a little bit slower pace to learn at, we're trying to do that. Children who are picking things up really fast, we're trying to cater to that. And play is one of those things that however you learn, you can adapt play to make sure that the learning is happening.
Definitely. And in regards to the different styles of learning, having worked in autistic school and special needs schools throughout my career, it's very important that education is flexible in those matters.
Absolutely.
Not just communicating learning into one style of learning like rote learning or, memorizing things. There's so many ways of learning, isn't there?
It's just insane. I reckon if you wrote down all the different styles of learning, you could wrap that paper 100 times around the world and still not have written them all down.
That's right.
But it's interesting, though, that you mention rote learning and academia a bit, because, of course, in years gone by, that was sort of the measure by which we set our children ready for school, this idea that learning only takes place in a classroom and only certain things are learning. Play-based is quite new, and it's a conversation that I have with a lot of families who are concerned because children can't read or write when they're getting ready to start school, and the families and the parents are worried. They say, are they going to have to stay back? Are they going to be ready for school? And I often say that we're actually not assessing literacy and numeracy at this stage. That's something that if they go to primary school and they can read and write and count, that's awesome. But if they can't, they're still going to primary school, because that's not actually something we're assessing at kinder level. I had a conversation actually with a parent at the end of last year who was really worried about their child's ability in counting particularly. And I said, a child who can count to 100 and a child who can't count past 5, they're both still going to school. That's not something that I'm looking at all. So, Elisa, how do you, as a primary teacher, when you get students from early childhood at such different levels with literacy and numeracy, how do you make sure that all those students are supported, that the ones who can read or write are not bored, but the ones who need that extra help are not left behind?
Yeah, that's a good question, Juliana. So in primary school, children actually get pre-tested. So just to sort of see their prior knowledge, what do they know, what letters do they know, what numbers do they know, even if they don't know it, can they identify it? Can they know what's before a number, after a number? It's those sort of skills that we're looking at. And, from there, the teacher will have a look at the number of students in their classroom and see what they're all capable of. They're all unique in their own way, and starting to put them in groups. Now, it doesn't mean each group will have, one, group A, group B, group C, depending on the levels. They don't get divided like that. They should actually, in each classroom, get divided as in groups where they will support each other in that group. So let's say a child who is learning their letters, from A to Z, and they are still having problem identifying certain letters, and they call it something else. Now, we probably all know a child like that, don't we?
Oh, yeah.
Now, in that group, there's also an advanced child that also knows their letters very confidently, but may not be able to write it. So there are different abilities and how a group should work. There's many different groups in a classroom. There may be 4 groups, 5, 6, depending on the size of the classroom. It varies each school. And they're meant to really encourage and support each other and uplift each child in their learning and skills.
Well, so it's a bit like creating a little community, breaking down those barriers and getting children to work together and support each other.
Definitely. So, as an educator, how I've seen it in my sort of journey is, we have to, as educators, be very open-minded. We're not perfect. No one's perfect. We're all learning together. No. We're community, and we want our best for the community and our children to become the better of themselves and belong in the community and be what they want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you really hit the nail on the head there when, as educators, we make mistakes and we're learning as well. Like something that I've said to some young educators coming in fresh out of TAFE, full of amazing ideas and awesomely passionate, enthusiastic. And one thing that I'll say when they ask me, what's the biggest lesson you've learned here? It's like, you've got to learn with the children. And sometimes you've got to learn from the children.
Definitely.
Like, it's just incredible what you can pick up if you're ready to take that leap and see the world through a child's eyes.
Yeah, that's definitely right. It's so amazing. And that's happened to me so many times where here I've got the lesson structured, the whole plan, what's going to happen in the beginning, what's going to happen in the middle and the end, and it gets interrupted by something I haven't seen before. And I'm just like, how did that happen? Oh, okay. I'm going to go this way now, even though I didn't plan for it. It's actually seeming to work a bit this way because the students are teaching me something new, which I haven't seen of them, and they're teaching me something that probably I wouldn't have seen through all that planning I've done.
Yep, no, absolutely. It's the same in early childhood. Children will get so interested in something, and then you'll plan this whole program around expanding that interest, and then they'll be doing something and they'll go, oh, look at this, and they've got a whole new idea and it's going in a whole new direction. But, somewhere else that went in another direction over the last few years in education, one that nobody wanted to go in, was COVID. That was quite the new direction for teachers, educators, families, students, everybody in the world, really. I don't think there was a spot left untouched by COVID.
Yeah, and that was totally a different era of education for teachers and schools and parents and families and even children. And
yes.
You know what? There were pros and cons, weren't there?
Oh, there absolutely were. Like for some students, they really thrived in those online platforms that were created, even if they were created hastily. They found that it was better for their learning and it opened so many doors. And then, of course, you really did have students who absolutely struggled and who needed that extra support that is hard to give over an online platform.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that was, linking back to what you just said then. And, students that found it difficult were those that need that extra attention, children that were in special needs or autistic schools. They just didn't understand looking through a screen. They rather that sort of physical right in front of them, learning with resources. They couldn't, actually learn through the screen. It actually distracted them more and they got more frustrated. So it just wasn't for everyone.
No, absolutely. And I think it wasn't just the students with those additional needs and those special needs. Some people are just really hands-on learners. And I know for kindergarten, like some kindergartens ended up having to, even though early childhood did not close during COVID, some kindergartens did, or due to staff who were ill or COVID exposure at a centre had to close. And some places were doing online kindergarten. And trying to work with a whole room of 3 to 4 year olds online was quite the unique challenge. You learned a lot of patience, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And especially with those, technical issues, I'm sure
Oh, gosh.
annoyed a lot of educators out there.
Oh, absolutely. And parents too, families, we know this wasn't an easy time for you either.
Definitely. But you know what? What came out of it, what I've realised in the community, and I've spoken to a lot of families and children, it's such a big demand for homeschooling these days.
Yeah, absolutely. And parents and families wanting to know more and understand more. So, but that's such a big topic. We could go on for so long about that. I think we better do that in another episode. What do you think?
Yep, definitely. That's another topic in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And, when we were going through COVID, I remember all this concern from families about, oh, is my child going to be behind? What's going to happen? Maybe they'll need another year of kinder. I don't know if you had parents worried about children repeating a year. But what was really interesting, I found, was while there were those negatives and those concerns, children showed this real ability to adapt and to overcome some of those challenges. And when they were coming back, I was noticing back into the classroom that what I saw when I was writing their transition documents at the end of the year was these were really empathetic, really capable children who sometimes just needed a little bit of help in areas of social skills or reading social cues, which, they'd missed. We've all missed. We've been in isolation for 2 years.
Yeah, that's right. And I suppose, educators during that time, we still had to do documents behind the scenes. We had to work from home on Zoom, still go through the usual process. We still had to do report writing. We still had to do transition documents. Now, in regard to transition documents, what does that look like for early childhood?
So in early childhood, our main transition statements, we call them, is the TLDS, or a Transition Learning and Development Statement. But we're lazy and we have so many acronyms, we just call it a transition statement or a transition document. And what that looks like really is it's almost trying to give the primary school teacher a picture of who this child is. We'll look at the different outcomes that I mentioned before, and where the child is thriving, where they need extra support. But we're also looking at things like, what do they enjoy? What's their family structure? The child does part of it too. They do a drawing, they answer some questions, families fill them in. And those statements and those requirements will vary from child to child. But what we're always trying to do is, as they go off to primary school, we want to give the teacher as much information as possible so that when that primary school teacher is getting ready for the beginning of the year, setting up their room, they know, okay, I've got a few children in this room who are all coming from this kinder, from this particular room together, and they've all been doing a bit of this. So that could be a good way to ease them in. So it's not so much, I feel, with the transition statements. Again, it isn't so much about what they know or what they've learned. It's really about who they are.
And I suppose that really emphasises on belonging, being and becoming.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So for those who are not familiar, those are, that's, I suppose, the overarching umbrella in early childhood, and I believe in the My Time, Our Place, which is a primary school framework as well. So focuses on children belonging in their space, being themselves, and becoming the best version of who they want to be.
Yeah. I suppose was it called the TLSD? Sorry.
Yes, the TLSD.
TLDS.
Oh, yes. Whoops. Transition Learning and Development Statement. That's it.
That's right. So you've called them transition documents, but some people call it TLDS, and there's different acronyms, and obviously the teaching language, I do that too. It's just a shorter way. There's all these long names. So from a primary perspective setting, we actually get these documents from you guys, and that's where there's sort of collaboration between all educators. And It's really good that there is that sort of networking rather than discovering yourself and doing it all over again, reinventing the wheel, when really it should be a continuous from early child, primary, and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for primary, we actually look at these documents that we receive from, for example, Juliana. She may have sent through a document of, I don't know, let me pull out a name, little Johnny.
Yep.
That's a name that, is so typical. I just had to pull it out there. And you may know a little Johnny, or you probably think, yes, I know a Johnny, for those are listening.
Yeah, it's like that song, isn't it? Johnny, yes, Papa.
Oh, that's a favourite. That's the favourite for the little ones these days. They love it.
Oh, yes.
And so these are the transition documents that we receive. And as a primary school teacher, mainstream or special needs or autistic, we would look at these and refer to these to understand the child that will be in our classroom, see how they've developed in, the being, belonging and becoming, and sort of what areas can we sort of expect in their learning skills before we actually start their pre-testing. And so to continue on from those transition documents, there are other documents out there when a child starts.
So many documents, never-ending documents.
Yeah, there's so more. And, I think every sort of generation of education, or every year, or every term, whatever you want to call it, there are new things coming out.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's good. We're getting more and more into being able to, I think, as much as paperwork can be frustrating, I think we're getting more and more into being able to individualize these documents for every child, so that we're moving away from this standardized idea.
Yeah, no, definitely. And every child won't have just the same documents. Some documents, like you've just mentioned, they will be different depending on the child they are, and every child's unique. So example is, for example, early ables. Now, some early childcare centres, I'm not sure if you're using this, Juliana. Have you heard of this before?
I haven't. I've heard of these documents, but I haven't used them yet. I think they're really common in some early childhood centres, early childcare centres, like some schools will focus on children and cater to children who have autism or other developmental needs. So I know they're really common there, but mainstream early childhood settings are not using these as standard at the moment.
Yeah, that's right. So just continuing from what Juliana said. So the early ables is basically for children with disabilities and developmental delay between the ages 2 and 5. So what it is a learning tool assessment called Early Abilities-Based Learning and Education Support. Now, wasn't that long? So that's why we call it ABLES.
Oh, yes.
LES. It's such a long name, and there's so many of those long names. So there you go. There's a new thing there you've learned. So there's that. And we also have a new thing that's just come out recently that sort of continuing, it's been rolled out in the education system last year. That I know definitely it's rolled out in my school, and it's called the Disability Inclusion. So what it is, it's a new reporting system to collect more details about these children with a developmental delay.
Oh, that's fantastic. And inclusion, I think we're going to talk about inclusion and disabilities and special needs in education in another episode, but it's such an important thing, moving away from this idea of trying to separate and segregate children, and bringing everybody in and catering to the needs of the children is really, really important. And so with these, and bringing it back to transition documents with that, families, these are such important things for you to get involved in as well. Take a note. What is my child drawing in this document? What are they doing? What answers are they giving me to these questions? Because we know that you're all busy. We certainly are not suggesting at all that families are just sitting home twiddling their thumbs while teachers are doing all the work. We absolutely know that's not true. But it is these transition documents, we really can't do our jobs without them. And we know it can be frustrating when the teacher hands you, oh my gosh, another piece of paper. We know that can be frustrating, but we're doing it so that your child has absolutely the best possible start in school that they can have.
Definitely. And talking about these documents from an early childhood and primary setting, even third parties, such as psychologists and paediatricians, can contribute
absolutely
on the child itself.
Yeah, especially for children who may, for example, if you've got a child who's got a speech delay or is in speech therapy, the speech therapist is likely to contribute to that transition document so that a primary teacher can be aware, oh, the child is struggling with making these particular sounds.
That's right. And I'm also aware of people migrating here, that obviously they would have an organisation to support the transition of a child from another country overseas.
Absolutely, definitely. Or, of course, in the best case scenario, I know last year at my centre, we had a family that had been in kindergarten for the year, but they discovered that unfortunately the type of visa they had didn't allow their child to go to school. And the kinder teacher and I spent a lot of time on the phone with various organisations, and eventually this child did get into school and changes were able to be made, and it was great that we could support that family. But it is something, I suppose, shout out to any educators listening in the audience today. Sometimes you've got to wear many hats, and parents and families, don't be afraid to reach out to your educators if you are having any kind of struggles. We may not be able to help you personally, but we can definitely refer you on to people who can.
Definitely. Those many hats, just think about, something off the track, but just something short I'll mention. Like sometimes I feel like an educator, I'm a nurse, I'm a mother, I'm a father. Like it's just so many hats, Juliana.
Yeah, they are everywhere. And getting children ready for school is one of those hats that we put on every year, and every year it's always different. The hat from last year never quite fits. And I think we've talked a lot about, I suppose, in this episode, Elisa, we've talked a lot about how would I say it? We've talked more about the administrative side of school readiness, given some definitions, talked about the documents, all these important things, and given a hint of what we're looking for in children. But the day is getting on, the episode is getting on, and we did agree to make this a two-parter. So I reckon next time we need to talk more about what school readiness looks like for children.
Definitely. So we've made this into two parts, like Juliana said, and you may find there might be more topics or questions. We may maybe make it into three. We don't know. So this is open-ended because education is open-ended. Well, it should be. Open-ended, is that the right word? More, open-ended.
Yeah, open-ended. Yep, there's no clear endpoint. You can go as far as you want to go with education.
Pretty much. So part two, what we've got here, me and Juliana had a talk about it. We've talked about the administration of how early childhood and primary today. And next episode, we are going to talk about part two, episode 1 of school readiness. We're going to touch on social interaction, executive functioning, interpersonal skills, fine and gross motor skills.
Yeah.
Now, what do you think about these topics, Juliana?
These are such exciting topics. They're awesome to talk about. And families, don't stress out if you're thinking, oh my gosh, what language are these two people speaking? We are going to define all of this for you next episode. And you'll probably find that you already know it. You may have just heard it in a different context, and you'll definitely be seeing it every day if you do have children. So that is all from us today. If you want to reach out and get in touch, we are always available. You can email us, pressplay4, as in number 4, edu@gmail.com. And we're also around on various social media, which you can find in the description below. Now, we're always happy to hear from you with feedback, comments, questions, and even suggestions. If there are aspects of the Victorian education system that you would like us to cover or that you would like to know about, feel free to get in touch, drop us a line. We are actually looking forward to any suggestions you have. We'd love to hear from you.
Definitely. We would love to hear from all of you, actually. And all our information is from the Victorian and Australian websites, such as Learning Potential, ACE, CQA, Victorian Curriculum, the Victorian Government, and these links can be found in the description below this podcast. So keep a lookout for part 2 of School Readiness.
See you then.